This happened back in 2019. I want to preface this by saying I'm not the type to scare easy. I'm also not really an outdoorsy person, but I had just quit my job. I was trying to get my first business off the ground, and I guess I wanted a change of scenery, something different. My parents had a small cabin back in Idaho, nothing fancy, just a little wood place they'd bought years ago for getting away from things. I called and asked if I could spend a few days out there by myself. They were happy to let me go. I booked a flight, packed up, and brought my dog Spark with me. He's a bull mastiff, big guy, calm most of the time, but he's got good instincts. I figured worst case, it'd just be me, him, and some quiet. When I got there, something felt off almost immediately. The cabin was surrounded by trees so thick that barely any sunlight made it through, even in the middle of the day, and the place itself looked rough, way more beat up than I remembered from the last time I'd visited years back. There were things scattered around outside. I couldn't even tell you what exactly, just clutter that shouldn't have been there. I grabbed my bags and went inside anyway. Inside, it looked like someone had been staying there. I knew my parents used the cabin from time to time, so my first thought was maybe one of them had been out recently and just hadn't cleaned up before leaving. But this was more than that. Next to the bed frame, there were empty cans of food. Looked like they'd been used recently, and a jar of water sitting there too. My parents wouldn't have left it like that. Nobody would. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe they'd let a friend use the place. Maybe someone had broken in at some point and crashed there for a night. I brushed it off and settled in for the evening. Around 1 a.m., Spark started growling. When he gets like that, it usually means something. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and looked out through the wooden window. I didn't see anything out there, no movement, nothing. But I knew, the way you just know sometimes, that something or someone was out there regardless. Spark went from growling to full-on barking, the aggressive kind, and my heart was pounding by that point. I got him calmed down enough to quiet down, and I grabbed my shotgun and went out to take a look around. Nothing. No footprints, no movement, nothing I could find. I figured it had to be an animal. Idaho woods are thick with deer and elk. It wouldn't have been the first time wildlife set a dog off in the middle of the night. I went back inside and tried to get some sleep. About 20 minutes later, Spark started up again. This time I looked toward the window and caught movement, just a shape against what little moonlight was cutting through the trees. I clicked my flashlight on and pointed it through the glass, and that's when I saw her properly, fiddling with the window frame like she was trying to get it open. I grabbed the gun again and shouted that whoever was out there needed to leave or they were gonna have a problem. I want to be honest, I half meant it as a warning more than anything. I didn't actually think anyone was gonna respond. Then I heard a voice, a woman's voice, and she said, "I know you're there, Matt." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I didn't recognize that voice at all. Nothing about it matched anyone I knew, and she knew my name. She started banging on the door after that, hard, fumbling with the doorknob like she was trying to force her way in. Spark was going off completely at this point, and I was standing there in the dark with my gun shaking in my hands. Out of pure panic, I fired through the door. The blast was deafening in that small space, and Spark went from full-on barking to dead silent in an instant. He pinned his ears back and pressed himself against my leg, which he never does. He's not a dog that scares easy either. Everything outside went quiet too. Those 3 minutes of silence after that shot felt like the longest stretch of my life. I didn't move, I didn't breathe right. I just stood there waiting for something, anything to tell me what had just happened. Then I heard someone running. I didn't wait around to figure out what that meant. I grabbed my things, grabbed Spark, and we left the cabin that same night.
When I opened the door to leave, there were bloodstains on the porch. My stomach turned. I didn't stop to look closer. I got in the car and drove straight to my parents' place. The next day, I told them everything. They were just as shocked as I was. They had no idea who could have been staying in that cabin. No idea who would have known to call me by name out there. Nothing. We reported it to the police and they looked into it, but the investigation hit a wall almost immediately. No missing persons reports that matched, no blood match on file, no explanation for who that woman was, why she knew my name, or where she went after she ran. I haven't been back to that cabin since. My parents put it up for sale not long after. Never went back themselves either. Last I heard, it still hasn't sold. I think about that voice sometimes, the way she said my name like she'd been waiting on me specifically. I don't know who she was or what she wanted, and I don't think I'll ever get an answer. I know there's a lot of people out there who don't believe in spirits or ghosts, who think the whole idea of a spirit realm is just nonsense. I used to be somewhere in the middle myself, but after what happened to me, I believe it without question now. When I was 14, I had a distant cousin named Benjamin. We called him Benny. He was obsessed with the paranormal, all kinds of spiritual and magic practices, genuinely believed in ghosts in a way that went beyond just being into spooky stuff. He used to tell us he'd lived this life multiple times before, said he knew exactly when and how he was going to die. I remember asking him once how he thought it would happen, and he told me it would be painful and it would happen in front of everyone. We brushed it off, kids being kids, Benny just trying to be creepy for the fun of it. But there was one thing about him that always put me on edge. He could read minds, or at least it felt that way. He'd tell you what you were thinking before you said it, sometimes finish your sentence before you got the words out. I told myself it was just him being intuitive. Some people are like that, but it never sat right with me. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I heard my mom let out a scream from downstairs. I jolted up out of bed and went to the top of the stairs to listen. Benny had been in an incident and was pronounced dead at the scene. Witnesses said they saw a man in a gray hoodie walk straight in front of a train. No hesitation. They ruled it a suicide. It never sat right with any of us. Benny wasn't depressed. If anything, he was one of the most joyful people I knew. But that's not really the story I want to tell. That's just the part you need to know before what happened next. We lived in a rural area outside Knoxville, Tennessee. Behind our house was a stretch of woods. Me and my friend Abel used to go back there all the time, mess around, nothing serious. We never went in too deep. But one day we decided to push past where we normally stopped, just to see what was out there. The deeper we went, the more the whole place started to feel off. We came up on a creek, and on the other side of it there was a figure. Couldn't tell what it was at first. Looked like a man, naked, just standing there watching us. I don't know what came over Abel, but he yelled out, "Hey, skinny butt." The thing charged at us, came right through the creek, straight in our direction. We took off running, and at some point I lost track of Abel completely. The thing was chasing only me now. I looked back once, and it was maybe 6 feet behind me. Then, the ground just wasn't there anymore. I fell about 30 feet into what I can only describe as a pit. I don't remember the fall itself, just waking up at the bottom of it, unable to feel anything from my waist down. I screamed, and for what felt like 30 minutes, I just laid there crying in the dark. I genuinely thought that was it for me. Then I heard a voice from above.
I recognized it immediately. It was Benny. He didn't explain how he was there, didn't say anything about it at all. He just stayed calm and told me he was gonna drop a rope down and that I needed to use my arms to get it secured and start pulling myself up while he guided me from the top. My legs weren't gonna work. He knew that without me telling him, but my arms still could. He kept talking the whole time I was climbing, kept my mind on his voice instead of on how high up I still had to go.
I don't remember getting to the top. I don't remember much of anything after that, just pieces. I remember his voice telling me to stay awake. I remember seeing trees passing above me at some point. The next clear memory I have is my parents' faces over me, and then the hospital. They told me I'd never walk again. Abel's body was found at the creek, severe impact to the head. They never gave us a clean explanation for what actually happened to him out there, only that he hadn't survived it. I never walked again either. I'm on support now, full time. I joined a community for people with disabilities, people who understand a different kind of life than the one I thought I was going to have. Sometimes I share this story with people there, and I can see it on their faces. Nobody fully believes me. I don't blame them. I know how it sounds. But I know what I experienced. I know whose voice that was in that pit.
I'm in a much better place now. I've started writing my own books, found some peace in that. But every so often I still drift back to that night. The sound of that voice coming down into the dark, telling me exactly what to do. Summer of 2008. I'd just lost my wife Belle to cancer. She was the healthiest person I'd ever known. Watched her diet, did regular checkups, ate clean, exercised. Nobody in her family had a history of cancer. I was the one who took risks, who ate badly, who never went to the doctor. For it to be her made no sense to me. It still doesn't. For months after she passed, I was barely functioning. I had our daughter Mary to take care of. She was 7, and there were nights I looked at her and felt this guilt I couldn't put down, like the wrong person had been taken. I never said that out loud to anyone. I just carried it. It got to a point where I felt like I was going to break completely. I called my dad and asked if I could bring Mary out to his farm in Akron, Ohio for a while. I grew up on that farm, me and my brother. I thought maybe being somewhere that didn't remind me of Belle every single day would help. I packed up Mary and our dog and we drove out. The first night there, I slept in my childhood room. Everything looked almost the same as when I was a kid. It felt peaceful, exactly what I thought I needed. That peace didn't last.
3 days in, Mary was out playing with the dog near the barn. I told her clearly, stay within the house perimeter. Past the barn was the woods, and I didn't want her anywhere near them. My dad had his own history with those woods. Things that happened out there over the years that I won't get into, but I knew enough to keep my daughter away from them. That afternoon, my dad and I were sitting on the porch, drinking beer, talking through everything. My mother, Belle, all of it. About 40 minutes in, I realized I hadn't heard Mary or the dog in a while. I went to check on her, tell her playtime was over. The barn door was wide open. I called her name, nothing. I checked the loft, every corner of that barn. She wasn't there. I felt this fear mixed with anger because I had told her specifically to stay where I could see her. I knew before I even said it out loud that she'd gone into the woods. I called my dad and we went in after her. I thought it would take 20 minutes. Call her name, find her, bring her back. She had the dog with her at least. We spent 9 hours out there. I was crying by the second hour. We searched every direction we could think of and heard nothing. Not Mary's voice, not the dog barking, nothing. The next morning we filed a report. The search went on for 8 days. On the 8th day, one of the searchers found something near a creek bed deep in the woods, a dark stain on a rock. For a second, my whole body went cold. I thought it was blood. It wasn't. It was red paint. Nobody ever explained how paint ended up out there or why, but it wasn't her. My heart had already dropped to the floor before anyone confirmed that. After 8 days, they officially declared Mary missing. I barely slept those nights. When I did, I had nightmares. Some nights I woke up convinced I heard voices outside. One of those nights I went out to the barn just to be alone. I stood there and wept, thinking about everything I'd lost in less than a year. That's when I heard the dog. I ran outside and saw Mary running toward the farm. I screamed her name at the top of my lungs and ran to her and picked her up and held her so tight I probably hurt her. I carried her inside and checked her over completely. She looked fine, better than fine. No scratches, no signs of exposure, nothing that should have come from 8 days in the woods. Her clothes were different from what she'd been wearing when she disappeared, and she was holding a teddy bear I'd never seen before in my life. I asked her where she got it. She looked at me and said, and I quote, "Mom is in the white cabin in the woods." My stomach dropped. I told her that wasn't true, that her mom was in heaven. She just shook her head and insisted, said she was in the woods, said she gave her the bear. Part of me, for just a second, wanted to believe her. I think any parent would, but I knew it couldn't be true. She was 7. She could have been taken by someone we knew or a stranger, and whatever she experienced out there got tangled up with her mind and grief and confusion. That was the only explanation that made sense. But nobody ever found anything. No trace where she'd been for 8 days. No explanation for the clothes, the bear, any of it. We stayed a few more days after that and then went home. Mary is much older now. We eventually moved to a new city for a fresh start, away from that farm and those woods entirely. I've never been able to fully let go of what happened, what she said, what she might have actually seen out there. Even now, knowing it can't be real, part of me still wants to believe her.